On the mic with us today is Vlada Galan, a woman who's worked in more countries than I've been to airports. And yeah, she's got a degree from Harvard. She's helped shape conversations between nations, advised during conflicts of war, and when her home country, Ukraine, needed her the most, she stepped up to the plate.
I was working for a sitting president, and it was an honor for me to work for a sitting president of a democratic country who was democratically elected. And I was pulled in to the ambassador's office, and he said to me, "Listen, I think you're working for the wrong guy. I can introduce you to the other candidate." And I said, "No, I'm very pleased with the candidate I'm working with, and unless you're going to offer more money, I'm not switching sides." And I was receiving quite a bit of pressure, and it was quite uncomfortable. And at that moment in time, I wasn't sure how to react. I was kind of backed into a corner, and I turned around and I said, "Look, very, very simple." I said, "If you continue to push this, this is the definition of regime change." And I said, "And you may think that, I'm young and I'm inexperienced, but I will put every CNN news van outside of this embassy." And I said, that you're going to talk and have to answer questions about why you're engaging in regime change."
Today, we're excited to share her story with you and the heart behind it as we delve into her new book, Success Mentality. This is Vlada Galan. This is Rise and Thrive with Ms. Monday. I'm your host, a photographer, filmmaker, and artist devoted to telling stories of brave souls who are standing up, speaking truth, and building something better. My podcast is independently created and powered by passion, just my soul connecting with your soul. If something here moves you on the show, I'd be honored if you'd like, subscribe, and share it. Your support fuels this movement, and it means more than you know, so thank you. Thank you for listening. I met today's guest over Zoom a while back, and halfway through our conversation, I realized I wasn't just talking to a global strategist. I was talking to someone who's been in rooms where real history happens. Her name is Vlada Galan. She's been on CNN, Fox News, and Newsmax. But more than that, she's got presence, clarity, and a deep understanding of what effective negotiations look like when it truly matters. So today, I'm excited to share her story with you and the heart behind it as we delve into her book, Success Mentality. This is Vlada Galan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ingrid. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. You wrote the book, Success Mentality. I loved it. It was incredible. Such an important book, especially for women. I would say this is the no BS guide for people who want to level up their life. And coming from someone like you who's actually lived it, thank you so much for writing this. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I want to start off by just saying, let's be honest, the world is full of coaches and online, I guess you would say gurus, promising the world. But you are the real fucking deal.
Well,
You're the real deal, babe. Not only do you work with the highest levels of government officials and strategy, you've done it in environments that most people only see on the news. So kicking it off, I'm curious, because I'm a woman and you're a woman. And as a woman who's worked in some of these intense, high-stake environments, a woman in very powerful places, I can only imagine the kind of pressure you have faced. I know there must have been a moment where you felt like you had to adjust to be taken seriously. And unfortunately, women do sometimes. And I'd love to hear what that's taught you about owning your voice, showing up for yourself, especially in male-dominating rooms. Like, are you bringing in research? Are you negotiating quietly? Is it high-level negotiation? Walk us through it.
Well, Ingrid, thank you so much for having me. It's incredible to be here with, another woman also doing her part and putting her voice in to change the world. And every day, it's fascinating. You say, what is it like to be in these rooms? It feels surreal every day, even today, even at this point, well into my career. But I go back to where it all started. It all started, with a blonde girl in her very early 20s, just coming out of college, walking in to, rooms of power at my own state level in the United States, in the state of Georgia. Nobody would take me seriously. I was young, I was blonde, was automatically categorized as the girl who brings your coffee. And I realized very quickly I actually lost a part of my identity and tried to change, which I think a lot of women do. I dyed my hair darker, I started dressing very conservative, I changed my wardrobe. I thought that I had to be this really uptight, conservative looking figure to be taken seriously. And in the beginning, it is kind of what it took. And I wish that wasn't the case for women. But
Mhm.
as I went along and as I started working on the international level, as I went from working for congressmen and senators and on elections for congressmen and senators to working on the international level for presidents and prime ministers and doing national party elections, I got myself back in that process because I realized that what I really brought to the game was in my brain. What I brought was strategy. What I brought was intelligence. What I brought was a different viewpoint. And the number one thing I brought was the answer to many of them that they didn't want to hear. In these power circles, you have leadership that is surrounded by people that are always giving them the answer yes. Nobody wants to tell a president or a prime minister or somebody running for office that you suck at something, that you're not very good, or that your people don't like you or are on the brink of a revolution and going to be rioting in the streets. Nobody in their inner power circles wants to say that because they're in it with some motive. They want a job. They want to continue their position. The last thing they want is to upset the leadership that they are working for, the president or the prime minister that they're working for. And you have someone that walks into a room and I have nothing to lose. My career is not going to change because of one president. My career is not going to change because somebody doesn't like me in the room. I've established myself. And the one thing I realized, even before I had a name, even before I had a long-standing career, was that I could bring in a perspective without being scared of bringing the truth. And I could not only bring the problem, but I could bring with it the solution. And this is what really started to make the difference. And when you're able to walk in to a sitting president and say, look, I hate to share the numbers with you, I hate to share the data, but this is what you're faced with, and you're not popular, and people don't like you, and things need to change, or this is the end. That is a very powerful position. And honestly, it's scary to you sometimes because you wonder, I've been thrown out of rooms. I've been told this isn't real. I've been asked to leave. But guess what? They know the truth because I've been asked to come back and I've been asked to fix it and I've been asked to be there. And what I would say to women, the advice I'd give to women is you can't imagine. I talk about this in my book, the power you harness in yourself. Everything you need is within yourself. That's actually chapter 1 of my book.
Mhm.
You have everything you need, and sometimes we forget that.
Yes, you've advised so many political leaders and all at the highest levels. You mentioned a moment that you worked directly with a country that had a favorable outcome. I think you said Africa. Can you share that story with our listeners?
Well, recently, I've worked many elections in Africa, but, on one of the campaigns, it was, I think, my first go on the African continent. About 10 years ago. When I came on board, I was kind of dumped into a situation where I didn't know what to expect. I'd never worked on the African continent. I was a fish out of water. I came in with a very American mentality, despite the fact that I'm from Eastern Europe originally. I came in with a very American, no BS mentality to get things done. And it wasn't received well. I faced comments about, racism and nobody liked the way that I worked. And they weren't used to this hard approach, which had nothing to do with race or color. It just had to do with the fact that I was used to this no BS kind of way forward. And I was working, unfortunately, against a candidate that was very well supported by a lot of Western countries like the United States. I was working for a sitting president, and it was an honor for me to work for a sitting president of a democratic country who was democratically elected. And I was actually pulled in to the ambassador's office, and he said to me, "Listen, I think you're working for the wrong guy. I can introduce you to the other candidate." And I said, no, I work for a private company. I'm, very, very pleased with the candidate I'm working with. And unless you're going to offer more money, I'm not switching sides. And I said, and I was receiving quite a bit of pressure and it was quite uncomfortable. And at that moment in time, I wasn't sure how to react. I was kind of backed into a corner and I turned around and I said, look, Very, very simple. I said, if you continue to push this, this is the definition of regime change. And I said, and you may think that, I'm young and I'm inexperienced, but I will put every CNN news van outside of this embassy. And I said, and you're going to talk and have to answer questions about why you're engaging in regime change. And I think that's the last thing you want. He said, that's crazy. It's not what I said. You misunderstood me. And I realized, the power of one, standing up for yourself. But two, I turned around on that campaign and I said to them, you are not the favored candidate by many of these other Western countries. And if we don't cut this out, if we don't cut out this division and this hate, and that we have in this campaign, if you start working and stop pointing fingers at the way I do things to get you to win. I have no other motivation but to make you win. Then we're gonna make it, and that's exactly what we did. We really buckled down, and we got onto the election, and he ended up winning the race, despite the fact that there was protests, despite the fact of all of it, and it was the first kind of experience on the African continent for me where, again, the lesson comes to really standing in your own space, really falling back to what you are and not apologizing. I could have apologized. I could have tried to change completely my approach, but that doesn't work. And this book is written for women to own themselves and not make excuses and be exactly who they are. And one of the lessons is, being aggressive. Women are labeled aggressive all the time as if it's a negative thing. Let me tell you something. If I wasn't aggressive in 90% of my career, I wouldn't have a career. I'm here because I owned being aggressive. I owned some of these character traits and I learned to use them in a powerful setting among power players.
That is so true. And now you are known for your strength, but also your deep empathy. I want to just highlight that. And you said sometimes you even cry when you've known you made a real difference. When the war broke out in Ukraine, you moved back to support your country and launched the International Ukrainian Crisis Fund. Can you walk us through the work you do there and why it also really matters and means so much to you?
When the war broke out in Ukraine, it was an incredibly emotional thing for every Ukrainian. You didn't know what was going to happen. I was in Ukraine the week before the war broke out. Everybody was saying you should leave. All my international clients were saying, no, there's going to be a war. And I was saying, no, nothing's going to happen. But it did happen. And the first instinct I had was to pick up a gun and go fight. And my husband said to me, what kind of difference do you think you're going to make? In experience, I registered the International Ukrainian Crisis Fund, which is a story I actually talk about in the book. It's fascinating because everybody told me that it cannot be done. And one of the lessons is never taking no for an answer. It can absolutely be done. And I hired the best team of lawyers to set up a nonprofit, and it was done. And I received the tax exempt status in a few weeks. And before you knew it, I was on a plane to Ukraine. I had international partners that started sending us medical aid. We received tourniquets and catheters and all kinds of life-saving aid that was critical for the front lines at that time. We started evacuations. I immediately built an incredible team of people, in leadership for the organization. We had bipartisan support from the U.S. government, and we're able to do something incredible. In fact, we were one of the first teams that was allowed to enter Bucha, which was in the beginning of the war, an occupied city where horrible atrocities had happened. And when we entered, they had cleared the bodies off the street, but had not cleared the cars yet. And my team was incredibly traumatized going in. And I started flying back to Ukraine every single month, spending 2 weeks a month, up to 2 weeks a month, focused on the foundation. And over the course of the last couple years, we've been able to deliver more than $8 million worth of life-saving aid. And, it's a side of me, as you said, a very soft, empathetic side. I think there's nothing as great as giving back to the place and the people you came from, but is stepping up in a moment and doing something. And it's unbelievable. I never thought that I could make that much change in the place where I came from, despite the fact that I've been involved in the political scene there, consulting, despite the fact that I spend quite a bit of time there. I just didn't believe when I started this organization that I could bring as much help, as much change, and it wouldn't be possible without our partners. But should be a lesson for every woman. You're never going to truly believe that you think you can do everything and that you can do it, but you can. and I was able to do that in Ukraine. My father is in Odessa. He was drafted despite his age. And it's been quite difficult. When you have family, it really hits home. It hits to the heart of who you are. And it's been an amazing journey with our foundation. I'm very proud of it.
Wow, that's just incredible, Vlado. Thank you so much for doing that. It's so needed at this time. Now, bring it back to your book, Success Mentality. Right at the start, and also at the start of this conversation, you said that everything we need is already inside of us. What was your moment in your life that you realized that? When did you know, and how did it change you?
When I boarded the plane, out of Eastern Europe on the way to the United States, at just 7 years old, I
Wow.
had no idea what I was facing as I was immigrating to a new country with my mother. And one of the things I kept asking her is, how will I make new friends? How will I speak a language that I don't speak? We didn't speak any English. I said, how will we assimilate? What will we do? How will we make friends? And she said to me, you have to realize that what you need is within you. You're smart enough to learn the language. You have the courage that it takes, and to assimilate into a new classroom. You're going to be just fine. And one of the heartwarming stories that I talk about is I walked in to my class and met the students. It felt quite warm. Within a month, they were doing a lot of reading exercise. I still couldn't read at that time. And they made a reading circle, and I wasn't included in the circle. The teacher
Mm.
didn't know how to act, so she kept me out of the circle. And I was the only kid isolated out. And at that
Mm.
point, I remember feeling so down and so frustrated and so upset. And I just stood up and I took my desk and I broke into their circle and put it right in the middle of the circle. Everybody seemed shocked at the girl who dare, define herself and defy the order. And I sat there and I couldn't read. So I just kind of sat there and everybody looked at me. And the teacher at that point realized that I was incredibly isolated. So she walked in the middle of the circle and she just started reading with me the words on the page, and I repeated after her. And I realized that day that
Wow.
I really did have what it took inside, and that sometimes it was more of the courage to act. And that's one of the days that I realized one of my qualities, and one of the which I talk about in the book, is understanding what your qualities are and what kind of attributes you come with. And one of mine was courage. That day I realized I did have courage inside of me. I just had to get over the fear and step over that initial phase. And I did it at a, very young age. And, the more we do these things between being young, teenagers, adults, the more we have courage to continue doing those things. I call them the small wins. The small wins add up to massive life wins. I knew from that point forward, nobody's going to put me in a corner. And that was a very valuable lesson. But at that time is when I realized so much of what I didn't even know was inside of me was there. It all goes back to that snowy 1996 day in September.
Wow, good for you for standing up for yourself. Your whole life probably would have been different if you didn't do that, So wonderful. Good for you, babe. Now, another question in your book, you challenge readers to ask themselves what they actually want in life. And I love this. I love that. Why do you think that question is so hard for people to answer truthfully?
The problem is people don't know their purpose. And it's not always easy figuring out your purpose. In fact, people, I think, spend their life aimlessly wondering what they're supposed to be doing. And I think we overcomplicate it. We're looking for some grand purpose. Like, you're not going to necessarily be the one to grow up and find the cure for cancer. And that's okay. But you can make a significant change. And it starts with, why do you do what you do on a regular basis every day? And for me, the huge denominator there was my family. You come from an immigrant family, you have a whole family back home that needs help and support, and they're counting on you as the immigrants who made it to, help and send money back home and support them and be there for them. And, for me, that was a huge reason. For other people, it can be trying to prove something to your own family. Many people grow up with some level of privilege or zero privilege at all, but they're trying to prove something either to the world or to their friends or to their family. And it's different for every single person. Some people have children. That's their purpose. That's the reason in their life. That's their why. And it's very important to get to your why. It comes up fairly early in the book, that I push the reader to find their why, because that is the basis of what makes you get up every morning and do something. And for me, that happened, early on when I was in college. I had a trip back home, and my grandfather was incredibly sick. I didn't have that much money with me. I just brought a few $1,000s for the trip, and I thought I was going to have this great vacation in Ukraine. I come from a port city that's on the beach, and I thought I was going to have this incredible, incredible trip. And I ended up spending that trip with my grandfather in the hospital and spending every bit of that money to make sure that he received the surgery that he needed and to improve his quality of life. And that's when, for me, it's like it clicked. And I said, you know what? I owe it to my family, but I owe it to the generations of women that came before me. Owe it, going all the way back to, Queen Olga, who comes, from, the region that I'm from in Ukraine. I owe it to generations before me to do something and to be different. And this was my purpose. And it really ignited a flame in me. When I came back to the States, I worked differently. I was much more motivated. It changes, and you open your eyes and you're ready to move every day. And that finding that why is so important. And I really walk through that in my book.
Love it. So we make choices every day, and sometimes we don't even notice the way we're getting in our own way, right? So there's a chapter in your book where you talk about self-sabotage. And I know that I sabotage. I think a lot of women do, but I want to know, what are quiet ways that you feel that people sabotage themselves without even realizing it?
Well, very often, whether it's simple things like sitting and scrolling through your Instagram feed for hours, that's a form of self sabotage that I think many of us think, oh, it's just a little habit. It's not a big deal. Just another hour. But before you know it, you're sabotaging the opportunity that you could be taking to do something else and fill that habit with something else. It's a small form of self sabotage. And there's many, many forms like that. Oftentimes, in a meeting, we have the opportunity to stand up and say something and make our voice known and show that we have some level of intellect and we deserve to be at that table. We deserve to be in that room. And we're scared, so we won't say anything. And even if the chance comes, we say, oh, no, no comments. I have nothing to say. I'm all right. Moving on to the next person. That's another way that you undermine yourself. It's actually better to say something. And maybe it's not always received well, but you took the initiative and you stepped forward. And that there's something to be said for that. So there's many, many ways. For me, one of the very kind of discreet self-sabotaging things that I come across when I'm coming off a long trip or a long haul, I almost go into this binge eating where I just want to cut loose and eat whatever I want and be whatever I want. And I had to tell myself, look, you're not making life any better for yourself. You're not getting any smarter, younger, fitter through this process. And, it's a way that I had to pull back and say, okay, why are you doing this? What's the root of this habit? Why are you pulling back in this time? You're not active with work. You're just kind of reclusing in, being careless about what you eat, being careless about taking care of yourself. Why? It's harder to bounce back 2 weeks later. And I had to really identify that within myself. But there's, call that a way to sabotage yourself or not. It's something I talk about. Imposter syndrome is not something we can necessarily control, but imposter syndrome, walking into a room and not feeling like you belong, that ends up destroying you over time. And it's really important to get a grip on it. Even at where I am in my career today, I still sometimes walk into a room and think, well, do I really need to be here, or why am I here? Do I deserve to be here? Am I smart as some of these people? And then I turn around and say, some of these people are in the room thinking the same thing. Do they belong in here, in this room with me? And I think it's so absolutely ridiculous. Of course I deserve to be here. I made it here, and I'm going to find a way to stay. And so there's many different facets of self-sabotage, but one of the most discreet silent ones is our small habits. The skipping the self-care part of our routines, the scrolling instantly through social media and wasting our time. Those are all ways we undermine ourselves in the long run. I think it's a huge problem.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. It's true. A lot of us spend a lot of time on our phones and also wonder if we should be in these spaces, but we should honor it. And I love that you say that. It's so good. Now, another empowering chapter that I loved when I was reading your book was that rejection is not the end. Can you share a moment in your life when a no turned into the best thing that ever happened? Because I resonate with this, and I think that our listeners will enjoy what you have to say, I'm sure.
Well, one of the things that I harp on is no is not an answer. Other than, maybe in your personal life, no is not an answer that you should take when it comes, to your life in many facets, to your career.
Hmm.
You should never accept the answer no. And I realized that no, you can build a stepping stone from a no to a yes. And many
Hmm.
times it's identifying the right person to ask. Many times it's asking a different way. And many times it's doing the work to get to a yes.
Hmm.
And in my life, after starting out in politics, I had a very successful first year of working in the political space. I was up for a job interview in Washington, D.C., working for a newly incoming senator. And they asked me what position I wanted, and I told them that the position I was aiming for, which was a mid-level position. It wasn't entry level, but I didn't want to be a staff assistant to someone, and I felt that I had the experience and I was qualified. And the shock on their face, they said, "Oh, don't you think that you're aiming quite high?" And I said, "No, I really don't." I said, "In fact, I have the experience, I have the backing, I have the positions behind it. I'm more than qualified for the position. And it's unfortunate that you clearly don't think so. I mean, judging by your shock and your answer." And in the end, I was rejected from that job. And I remember it's a no that I thought, okay, how do I turn this into a yes? How do I apply my own strategy to turn this into a yes? And I thought to myself, in this case, maybe it's redirection that you're getting. And what do you do? How do you pick yourself up from this? And I realized that I wouldn't get the job. That job wouldn't turn to a yes no matter how hard I tried. So I turned around and I said to myself, look, I have people reaching out to me after this campaign cycle. They're trying to get me to come on various campaigns. So I can't be everywhere at once, but I can consult. And I said, that's the day that I decided I would start a firm and I would start a company. And I was a one woman show in the very beginning. I had no idea what I was doing. But I went and registered a company. I went and opened a bank account. And in fact, it's a great story that I talk about. I had no idea how to even register for a tax ID number. I registered the company. When I came to the bank, they said, "You don't have a tax ID number?" I said, "No, I don't know how to get one. Can you help me?" And they said, "Okay, sure." So they pulled up a computer at the bank and actually helped me. So I had this, bigger than life dream, bigger than life aspirations. And I didn't even know how to do some of the most basic things, as somebody who really wants to run a company. But in the end, that no turned into launching me into my consulting career, which changed my life completely. And I remember how down and how discouraged I was in that moment. I felt completely depressed, completely down. And I thought, if I can't get a mid level job, I mean, it's shocking. But sometimes, when you can't turn that no into a yes, sometimes it's a redirection for you to take on something new. Life is pushing you into a certain direction. It's really important that you embrace it. And I certainly did that. And it led me to not only, my very successful domestic career, international career. And I bumped into some of those people years later at a networking event, and they were shocked. They said, "Vlada, we see you in the news." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "And it's absolutely thanks to you." I said, "I would still be stuck on Capitol Hill working some dead end job, for a senator who's no longer even in office."
What a great perspective. You thanked them. Some people would be like, F you, but you're like, no, thank you, because you actually opened a new door for me. That's wonderful. Now, in chapter 5, you talk about dead weight and how do we know when someone in our life has become that dead weight and is supportive or not supportive. I think this would be something very useful for our listeners. Why is letting go so important when things aren't working around you or you're feeling this weight or uncertainty?
Well, it's very, very important to analyze the circles that you have around you. We don't realize the power that the circles around us have. And, I talk about 3 levels of circles: your inner circle, your acquaintances, and kind of your professional network. Your inner circle shouldn't be really more people than you can count on one hand. And your acquaintance circle is really where everybody kind of has to be kind of categorized into. And oftentimes you realize, and anyone else who's left is really professional network or something like that. But what people often don't realize is around them, they carry a lot of dead weight. It's people that are not enhancing your life. Just because they've been there for a very long time doesn't mean they're useful or doing anything for your life. In fact, oftentimes when we assess our inner circle, we realize very quickly that, most of those people are not necessarily serving us or not in it for us. There's very few people that are really in it for you, that are really happy for your wins. And, everyone else just gets recategorized, to acquaintances. For me, it was actually quite shocking very recently, and I wrote about this in the book. I lost a best friend. And who would have thought that I would have lost a best friend of 10 years? It was an absolutely shocking phenomenon. Saw a very different side of her. And I didn't realize it up until that point that she had been incredibly envious all along. And that, she really was just kind of clinging on and mooching off me. I helped her with work. I employed her. I was very, very close to her. And I realized I was always giving nonstop. I was giving, 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 giving. And one of the ways to recognize where you need to cut dead weight is an unbalanced relationship. If you are giving, giving, giving all the time, and in return, whether it is your marriage, whether it is, a boyfriend, whether it is a dear friend, or, even in a co-working space, when you are constantly the one that they're going to for something and you're giving, 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 and it's not a balanced relationship and you're not getting anything back in return, that is a problem. That is a disbalanced equation that takes away your energy, that sucks your time, and it actually prevents you from accomplishing your goals. And the faster you cut it off and recategorize that person, whether you push them all the way out into your professional work, whether you put them as an acquaintance, whether you just cut them off completely, the better off you are. And it's actually amazing what happens in that moment. When you cut off the dead weight, it's like opportunities start coming left, right, and center. You don't even know what to do with it. You feel almost attacked with the greatness that is coming at you in life, because what happens is you open the door for something else to fill that space. And what starts to fill that space is something that is there for you. And it's really, really amazing what happens. And I think people are scared to let go because they're scared of what they're going to lose. But I think you have to think of what you're actually going to gain.
Love that. Think about what you're going to gain. It's so true. When you let go, I've had very many situations where I've had people in my life, girlfriends as well. And when they've disappeared, the moment I was really sad, but then I realized like my whole life almost got a boost. Right? It,
Absolutely.
it was it was incredible. I was like, whoa, oh, wow, that person was affecting me so much without even realizing it. So thank you for saying that. So I'd love to end on a powerful note. Um, I mean, everything's been powerful in this conversation, but in your final chapter, you talk about the comfort zone. And I'm sure a lot of listeners will resonate with this. What does comfort zone actually look like to you in everyday lives? And what's one brave step a listener can take today to feel like not just cutting the dead weight? Is there something else?
Well, nothing good ever
Okay.
happens in your comfort zone, because what
Okay.
happens is you have this great life plan and you've now cut off the dead weight and you've made it to this point where you're rolling along and things start to feel really good. They start to feel really comfortable. I got to this place when I started working internationally in my career, when I made my first $1 million, and I was thrilled and thought, I've made it. I've made it in my life. Here I am. World, look at me. And then I realized that was quite comfortable. So then you don't work the same way and you're not as productive. And I realized that I started burning through the money quickly. I realized that I wasn't being smart in my comfort zone. And I realized that where's the motivation to go further? And if I don't go further, I'm not challenging or pushing myself. I got quite lazy and in this kind of space. You take your clients for granted, you take your life for granted, and you get very, very comfortable. And I realized I'm not growing as an individual. I'm not learning anything in this space. So the best way to get out of your comfort zone is to try something new, and something, the way that you know you're on the right path is if it scares you. If you are trying something that scares the hell out of you, then that is the way to go. You've got to try something that is completely new to you, that feels foreign, that feels scary, and you almost feel really silly doing it. And you think, do I even know what I'm doing? I mean, I've never really done this before. That's and when you master that, you start to realize maybe I'm almost invincible because I took on something that I had no idea how to do, and I've managed to master it. And, in my career, I was an elections expert, but I branched into the field of lobbying. I branched into the field of crisis management. And with each new step, you take on a new direction that maybe doesn't always feel so comfortable to you. And you have to do that. For some women, it's something as personal as getting really back into the dating field. I think some women are terrified and they do what's comfortable. They hide behind a screen or they're scared to put themselves out there. And in every facet of your life, it's facing that fear and saying, no, I'm going to try it anyway. Yes, it's going to be scary. And one of the things I always tell myself is, I know, I acknowledge, I never disregard my feelings. I always tell myself, I know that this is going to be scary. I know I'm going to hate this 100%, but I know that on the other side of this, I'm going to be better for it. And that's how I mentally prepare myself. I don't lie and just tell myself, oh, it's going to be the easiest thing in the world. I tell myself, I'm going to do it anyway. It doesn't matter how I feel. It doesn't matter how much I hate it. It doesn't matter what kind of, hellish situation I have to go through. I'm going to do it. And one of those examples for me was working on a completely different side of the world. I work across 5 continents, and working in Africa, you're faced with working, in areas where there's, in some places conflict zones. I've dealt with warlords. I've sat at a table with warlords. And that's scary. You have no idea what you're doing. Your security's never guaranteed. And I said to myself, either I want to do this and I want to make a change, or I don't. And I do. And, I can't tell you that I didn't walk into those rooms thinking, am I enough? I was terrified. Do I know what I'm saying? Do I know what I'm doing? But I did it anyway. And through the process of that is how you get to the other side and you master something new. And I think every woman can benefit from facing that fear and just doing it anyway.
Wow, Vlada, there you have it, listeners. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today. You are on fire, and everyone needs to pick up your book today. Success Mentality, out on the shelf. Read it. I loved it. You'll love it too. So thank you, Vlada. This is a reminder to our listeners. Power isn't something you're given. It's something you claim. As always, thanks for tuning in. Until next time, be bold, stay clear, and demand more from your life, ladies. You deserve it. Thank you so much, Vlada.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed our interview today, please share and like it. And if you have a unique story of how you are creatively engaging with our world, I can help you share it in a multitude of different ways. Whether it's through photography, film, or being a guest on my podcast, be sure to reach out. My mission is to make you and your brand stand out. Please visit our website, www.riseupandfixit.com. Now, this is Rise and Thrive with Ms. Monday, brought to you by the Rise Up and Fix It podcast.